everyone. My name is Yara. I'm from Egypt. I work for Nazra for Family. Um, shall I do some reflection on the panels that I attended, Jack?
A sense of like a reflection of not just the panels, but also like IGF as a whole. Like, to what extent do you think that it's kind of met its mandate on paragraph 12, for example, like, you know, to ensure gender inclusion and stuff like that?
So it's my first time to attend IGF, and my work is mainly focused on women human rights defenders and violence against women on this aspect. I think that the one thing that really was interesting for me is the high level of participation of women in attending all the panels. I think not not all women issues were covered through the whole agenda. Maybe there was the one workshop on technology, economic, and opportunities for women, in which I participated, and I spoke about how what are the threats that face women organizing online, and how their personal information is being used against them to discredit their work. And then I took part also in the censorship and human rights workshop, in which I talked about like how the Egyptian government is using monitoring and censorship programs and hacking programs to go into the personal online accounts of activists. The really one thing that I felt it's good and it's unique because I've never been to a conference where all different types of people coming in from different sectors. So I've never sat down on a table in a panel with governments and private sector and us. It's always like whether it's the civil society is organizing a panel or the government is organizing something. So in this aspect, I think it's really good for people to talk together and hear from each other how do they think differently on the same issue, and maybe we can. It's a way to get the gap between all of us smaller. I think also that the civil society sector should also work more, for example, with private companies in relation to security issues, in relation to also restricting laws that make the private companies have to give up personal information for governments, such as Egypt. So yeah, that's primary.
So should we go on, or if you want to have any comments, all good?
I would just make a very brief comment, because it also seems to be reflected in this room that in the gender, session, we're also talking to each other, thanks to the 3 men who came, but, it seems to be par for the course of conferences.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always a challenge, when gender just somehow becomes like women's issues, or like it's not really about gender relations anymore. And I think that's something to also reflect on in terms of IGF. I mean, we see a lot of women's participation in the space, and I really think diversity in the IGF. I mean, I've been to a few, and this year it's really quite visible, not just in terms of the women's participation, but I think there's also much more, for example, LGBT participation that's quite visible, and people of different disabilities. So, I think it's really a visible improvement, but I don't know how far that translates into issues, or how far that translates into actually bringing an agenda into the space that really talks about, so for example, we're talking about censorship and freedom of expression, but still we don't see very much the conversation focusing on the specific kinds of censorship that women face, for example, everywhere in the world, that might not be about state repression, but might be about, say, for example, domestic violence, or about, all of these other things. So it doesn't sort of get entered into the agenda, and therefore it doesn't get entered into sort of solutions here. And I wonder what else it is that we can do, as people who are in this space, to try and bring this a little bit more forward. With that, how about Joy? Would you like to reflect a little bit about, because you've been also forwarding a lot of the human rights work and the human rights framework in IGF, and maybe this is a possibility.
Sure. And I just want to acknowledge we've got seem to have a lot of local Azerbaijan women who are here. In fact, this is probably the most I've seen in any workshop. So it would be interesting to hear what they've got to say about women's human rights here in Azerbaijan. That would be very useful to know. And anything from that we can take forward from this IGF would also be helpful. In terms of more generally, I think, I think one of the really critical issues for women's empowerment and women's rights in internet public policy at the moment is really plainly visibility. I mean, just actual visibility for the specific issues that impact on women and that are affected by, things like filtering, content takedown. We hear a lot about journalists, but there are specific issues for women journalists, particular ways in which they're targeted, even Kajali here in Azerbaijan, for example. So, I mean, just a real visibility for the fact that there are gender-specific issues for women in terms of internet public policy. So that's and also in terms of women's leadership. The number of panels that we've been on. I mean, I think where there have been few women, and it was really great to see the gender report card for this IGF. I'm not sure if all organisers have filled it out, but still. So I think there's some stuff about visibility, leadership, and also what we're seeing in our work is new threats to women's human rights defenders. Specifically for women's human rights defenders, we've been working with Amnesty International and others for secure online communication training for women, how to be safe online, how to protect yourself from attacks, but also not in a passive way, not in a protectionist way, but in an empowering way, to take control of technology, to have passwords and encryption and so on. So I think it's one thing that's frustrating for me, because I know when I first came into the IGF space, this was the same thing that feminists were telling me was needed then, and that's 4 years ago, and it's still the same thing. So for me, I think what's the powder keg? What is the powder keg to get these issues really ignited and alive? And maybe we actually need to have a main session or a primary theme in the IGF that's focused specifically on women's human rights, as one way to do that. That's my thoughts.
One of the things that I felt during the women's workshop is that there's a sense of putting the women's rights issues aside. So I don't know if would it be a different strategy if we include women's issues within all the other workshops. It's like, first of all, include more women panelists, definitely, whether in the opening session or general panels. But would it be, I don't know, if we can, for example, if we're working on general topics such as spectrum, which I don't know what it is, but yeah, if we can see if that is related to women specifically or not. So we generalize women's issues in different workshops rather than put one workshop on women where mostly, like, there were a couple of men, but there were mostly women attending it. So I don't know, maybe just the thought.
Thanks, Sarah. That's a good strategy. And thanks also to Joy for reminding about noting the fact that there is a lot of Azerbaijani women amongst us, I think. I think it will be a really great if we can get if you share, what is the situation.
Hi, my name is Leman from Baku. We are glad to see you in homeland, and I want to say some words. In our country, governmental and non-governmental agencies conduct a lot of fulfillments over women rights and education of women, especially in rural areas, because I think if a woman well educated, she can she can defend her rights herself. And but there are some censorship in our country because of our traditions. Men's rights are in some places are higher than women. It's because of our traditions, because we are Muslims. and, but our women are very engaged in IT area, as well as and what else I can see you. um, uh-huh. And what else you want to know? Really?
For example, I know that the internet penetration for women is only 25% compared to men. So, you know, is there like a significant gender gap between women and men in terms of internet access? And is there like who's working on this issue? Is it mainly government who's driving this, or is it private sector? Is there any civil society organizations? I don't know, whatever you think is important. Or like, you know, is censorship affecting you in any way in particular, or not? Or if that's it, also it's okay. Or if there's anyone else who would like to share a different opinion, that's also fine.
My name is Angela Nicoară. I work here in Azerbaijan. I'm not Azerbaijani. I represent IREX, which is a media NGO. We found that women do not have the same internet access, like you said. I didn't know it was 25%. That's very low. So what we did, we set up in each big town an internet center, and we discovered the majority of our audience is made of women, young women. The problem here in Azerbaijan is that there isn't that much internet access. Then when there is, it's quite expensive. So not many people can afford it. There are cyber cafes, but for a woman, it's seen as a bad thing to go there. So our centers, that's why they became very popular. They are an educational hub. We had a very successful project with young girls, 13 to 17, where we took them, we gave them the skills to make a short video, a short movie. They came up with some amazing stories. The problem is now they're going back home, but again, they don't have a computer, they don't have a camera, they don't have internet access. So unless there is more support from the government side, we are just, you know, civil society, then that won't go much further.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that actually that is a very important issue. I was at the access session, and a lot of people who's working on access, they always talk about infrastructure. They talk about broadband, cable, spectrum, but then they don't really think about the actual physical internet access point also matters a lot, especially if you're a woman and your mobility is constrained by so many things, by norms, by culture, by religion, where you can or cannot go and for what purpose. So I think that's also something that's very important for policy makers to take into consideration in terms of thinking of access, and also for people who are wanting to kind of support anyway, but funder or private sector to also take this into consideration as well. Saying that, I think Nigat, you might also be able to share something with us, because I think they were, you know, one of the things that was raised really is the role of tradition and culture, and coming from Pakistan and as a women's human rights defender working on internet rights issue, I'm sure you have a lot to share that can be very valuable to us.
Thank you so much, Jack. Yeah, I think in this IGF, there was this thing which was very visible. I got that space to share my experiences as a woman human rights defenders, and not only the experience I had in Pakistan as working as an activist and working as a for the causes of women, their access to education, their access to internet, to different facilities and fundamental rights. I had a lot of difficulties, and I think I never got this space like IGF, like especially this year in my own country. where I faced that threats while supporting Malala on her issue. And then when I wrote a couple of articles, I got blackmailed. I got threats on internet, and when I kind of tried to connect with the organization who are supposed to help women human rights defenders, there was no response from their side. There was no response from government side, and there was only these international organizations who actually responded me. But it was just the encouragement and what they could do. They are not there in the physical space. So the visible thing I witnessed in this IGF was the space which actually women human rights defenders and activists got in sharing their experiences and knowing that what could be the strategies they can adopt, when they go back to their own respective countries. And I interviewed Arzu. She's a famous blogger of Azerbaijan, and she shared some similar experiences, that being Muslim woman, how they face different hurdles and obstacles in accessing while accessing internet and other facilities. So yes, I think that's very good, and I want to. I'm very glad that Freedom House actually in both of their panels, the gender proportion was very equal. In my panel there were 4 women and 2 men. I mean it's not equal, but there the woman presence was good, and I'm so glad that APC actually organized this kind of discussion, which is actually very good, and where we are going to hear the local voices as well. Thank you.
I'm wondering if there's anyone amongst us who's from the private sector. You are? No? Okay, so there's none of us from the private sector. Is there anyone amongst us who's from government? Government? Representing government? No, are we all civil society? / academia. Okay, that's good to know. Or independent, I suppose, as well. Anya, would you like to sort of share some reflections about how you feel, about IGF this year, how far it's integrated gender issues in terms of your work as well around democracies?
I'm Anya from the Internet Democracy Project in Delhi. I'm not sure how much I have to add, but I personally don't feel there was all that much attention for gender issues. I'm really happy to see Nigat say that she still felt there was a lot of space to bring out her issues. I think that's one important step. But I definitely don't think that women's issues are on the table here in a systematic way, let alone feminist perspectives, which I think would reconfigure some of the debates even much more dramatically. And I think despite the fact that we have had some wonderful conversations on these issues with some of the people in the room, I think we've really struggled to convert that into something larger in the IGF. A very small anecdote, I had to present a workshop report yesterday in the security, openness and privacy session, and I was asked to make it shorter, but I wasn't wearing my headphones while I was making the presentation, so I didn't actually hear the moderator say that. And it's really interesting, because afterwards there are 2 men who told me that I should actually have been shorter, and one said it was disrespectful that I didn't cut it short. And there were 2 women who immediately said, but they cut her short because she was a woman, because they did not do that with the men in the session. And I to share it here, not to like save my own back, but interesting. So interesting that despite the efforts of the IGF to always say panels have to be gender balanced and they have to be regionally balanced, the majority of the panels continue to have mostly white men who represent the Western world, or at least that particular group is definitely still overrepresented. And sometimes I wonder if that's also because people like us don't make enough noise about these issues, and perhaps don't put often enough our own candidates forward. A lot of talent. I'm not saying that that particular group doesn't have things to contribute. They obviously do. But I think there's a lot of other talent out there in the field, and we should push perhaps other names and other people more to make the panels more diverse and to make sure that a different kind of perspective gets integrated in a structural way. Thanks.
Thanks, Sonia. Is there anyone who would like to comment before I carry on? So I guess that's a really interesting point. I mean, we've really talked about, okay, that women, there is some space to bring up some issues, but it's not systematic. I mean, you know, there seems to be lacking a bit of a concerted effort to really, I guess, I don't like this word very much. It's what's being used to mainstream gender into the IGF. I guess the way that the IGF works. I think this year. Sorry, you cannot hear me? Oh, hello, hello, hello. Yes. Huh? Hello. And I think this year especially there's been a lot of talk about the viability of IGF as being the main space where internet governance issues are discussed, because it's able to bring together all these different stakeholders into one space to talk about important policy issues, and you know, whether there is a need for another space where maybe governments should play a larger role. And I guess, I don't know if we are all civil society and if we work on women's rights issues, we are very much used to this dynamic where we work with the government, you know, where we demand from the government certain rights, where we say, okay, you know, you've signed CEDAW, you've ratified all this convention, and you need to, you know, ta. And we're not used to working so much maybe with the private sector, with companies like Google or Facebook or other companies to say, you know, this is something that's happened to us, and I don't even know how to demand from Facebook and Google to say, hey, you need to do something about it. But at the same time, this is why I really like IGF, because IGF is one of the only space in the world where I am able to do this, where I'm able to go, hello, Erica, you know, Director of Public Policy of Facebook, do you know that this is currently happening? And is there something we can do together to deal with this? So I think that's a little bit of an interesting question for me, as well as to everyone. I really wonder, what do you think about this? And I also want to hear maybe from Parminder, who's done a lot of work around, you know, looking at governance processes, and IT for Change as well is one of the organizations that's really driving this forward. If you have any thoughts around this topic, like, you know, the viability of IG space to push forward, gender issues in internet governance.
Okay, you added, am I audible? Yes. You added gender in the end, because before that I thought I'll say there is gender discrimination, because you asked me to talk about IGF issues, and you talked about what are the structural things about the IGF. So I think the two main points from what I've heard till now, I would like for the group to consider. The one aspect is we talk about what others should do, and we have articulated it. They should, you know, include women more. The women issues should be put up. But there are some set of tasks which we set for ourselves as a group which want more gender inclusion. And I think there are two sets of those tasks which come to my mind from the discussion I've heard here. One is we need to broaden what we call as women's issues. I mean, we have spoken a lot about online spaces and how they may be protected, but how women have used technologies to mediate power in the offline spaces, especially poor women in terms of their economic, political, and social rights. And these are the kind of projects and work which IT for Change has done, where women have used telecenters and community radio and community video to change the dynamics of power within a village and the dynamic of relational matrices with external agencies, and through that changed power. And there is clear things which you can see that just because women took control of those dynamics, they did make those changes. And I think these identification of what are women issues is also our job. And we just say, okay, we know the women's issue, but the work is that other people are not representing those issues. We need to understand, articulate better what are women issues vis-a-vis the forums like the Internet Governance Forum or the Information Society forums, which we are talking. And I think the breadth is missing. There are certain issues which are articulated more than the other issues on the social, economic, cultural rights issue. And that work is our work. That's not other people's work. And if we get it done well, then we can go out and tell them that, okay, you haven't got it represented well. Now it's on you, not on us. And this is what the gender dynamic coalition should do. The second part is that we also, and it comes from the first part, when we identify structural issues of what's happening in this world, what internet is doing to the world, and how do women and women from the South get affected, we also understand who are our structural allies within a bigger system, within this IGF system, who are our allies for which kind of issues, whether freer flow of information is good for us or not, whether network neutrality is good for us, and what is it for women, what does network neutrality do for women. And then if we find certain issues which are more pro-women, then to make structural alliances with the groups who are pushing for those kind of issues. That's our work to do. And then we can go and also talk about what others need to do. I think both things need to be spoken in some kind of balance. Thank you, Jack.
Those are really good suggestions, and thanks very much. And yeah, I guess like identifying structural alliance is quite an interesting strategy. Does anyone want to? Yep.
Can you hear me? My name is Gülnar. I work in the Institute of Information Technology. I want you to know that in our institute, can you hear me now? Okay, in our institute, among the workers, almost 60% contains of women, and they are investigate on different directions on information technology and communication, and it's very big. It's very great advantage for us, because in our country, as my colleague Aslaman said, because of our traditions, sometimes women can't express their opinions, and the great problem is can't be freedom. They can't express yourself. And also, day by day in our country, women try to go to future and to improve themselves. But in our country, sometimes women can't speak, can't say their words, their wish. And I hope that coming soon our women will be more freedom in every degree of our government, and I'd like you to know that our women and our girls also very active in the social networks, in Facebook, in Twitter, and finally I would like not to lose touch with you and to communicate with social network by the social networks in Twitter and Facebook. He says, thank you.
My name is Courtney Raj. I'm with Freedom House, and I just want to comment on a couple of things that have been said on the structural and organizational level, and some other ideas. In terms of the structural, so this is my first participation in the International IGF, and I organized a workshop. So this is like a very practical suggestion, but maybe one thing that this coalition could do is to actually put together a list of potential participants outside of civil society, because I think it's very clear that this issue is broader in civil society, and there is, I think, at least from my first year perspective, adequate representation of women from the civil society perspective. When I was looking for my panel, I would have loved to find a female private sector representative. Government seemed to be a little bit more, at least the U.S. government had a lot of people, including some women on it this year. We had 50-50, but the Gender IT report card was a great way to really assess, well, where are the women voices being heard? They're primarily on the civil society side. And in terms of how to reach out to the private companies, like one thing that we did this year is bring a delegation of activists. And one of them is, for example, a Ugandan LGBTI activist. And I think that if we want to get away from having women talking to women with a few male representatives, it is about getting to gender as opposed to women's issues. And I'm definitely new to this, so maybe it is about women specifically, but I heard you mention the LGBTI community, et cetera. And so thinking about gender more broadly, and absolutely agree with, was it Yada, that that if you create a women in human rights workshop, it's going to be women and human rights activists at it. It's not going to be, private sector people who work on the technological infrastructure. So absolutely integrating that in. So for example, in the pre-event that we did on human rights, I did a presentation on state attacks against human rights activists in the Middle East. And so I had a section in there about gender. So I think it's about just integrating that and really trying to make that effort. And if there's some way, as a guide for first-time workshop organizers or part of the recommendations that are made on the website, that thinking about adding the gender dynamic in there would be helpful. So
that's really very, very helpful. Very concrete suggestion as well, no, on how to really move this forward. So we've talked about private sector, we've talked about civil society, and we do have like a feminist member of the technical community who talks about, things that sometimes go over my head. And I don't know, Avri, if you want to share a little bit about, the stuff that you do in ICANN and so on, and how to engage the technical community maybe, which is probably the hardest on gender issues. Like, how do you bring gender into spectrum?
Thanks. I'm actually not sure how you engage the technical community on anything other than the technical community stuff. But within the technical community, you are seeing more of a gender balance as time goes on, and I think that that's a good thing. But unless you can find a way of showing a technical connection to a gender issue, or they've experienced a gender issue in their own life, like work discrimination and such as that, I think it's hard. And especially the technical community you'll get here are those that are normally going to be already fairly senior and fairly adjusted. I think women in the technical community have already accepted an almost ungendered role. And as sort of to be acceptable in the technical community, maybe less now than previously, you had to sort of be ungendered. You had to be a techie, not a gendered individual. And I think that may be changing, but I don't know how much it's changed, and I don't know how much that's come to people here. If I can comment on some of the other things, I was sort of waiting. I think on getting the issues, and again, avoiding the mainstreaming, but getting the notion of the issues attached to all the other subjects that they belong in, that's one of the things that, first of all, the MAG members from civil society and other, women and feminists within the MAG need to do from the very beginning. As they start their work in February, they need to make sure that when looking at issues, they've included all the aspects of the women's component of those issues, of the women's aspect of those issues in them. And I think if that doesn't happen right then the next step is when the workshops are being submitted, and to submit workshops in the themes, but in the themes with the particular subtopic, and moving on from there. And I think that starts to move it along. I think anecdotally, one of the funny things that I've noticed, odd, is that whenever I've seen a panel with more women than men on it, people have tittered about, oh, isn't it funny? We've got more women than men. But when the panel was completely man or just one woman on it, nobody notices a thing. And so that, for me, was one of those sort of obvious signs. And if we could go through an IGF meeting without anybody commenting, oh, wow, there are more women than men, that's gender balance, ha, 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 then that will be an achievement as far as I can tell. So I guess that, I don't know if that covers, but those were the things I was thinking about.
It's like gender and ICT indicator, no, of women's political participation. Do people Twitter? Um, oh, okay.
Maybe I will pick up on Avery what she was saying and about the work of MAC and civil society members, because we are discussing how to reach to the technical sector, to the private, to the governments, but I don't actually see even the civil society picking up on the women's rights. I have been following a number of human rights workshops. There are no mention of the gender. There are no mention of the women's rights. Even when we speak about issues like the freedom of expression, and you go about this safety of the media and bloggers, and there is no mention of the harassment of the female bloggers because they are women, because their feminist views. That's a problem for me. So we are not even there. And then in terms of practical suggestion, and as was discussed here, I kind of agree about that making the panel on women's rights doesn't probably make such an effect, but really did what we get this year. After the 7 years, we finally got women's rights into the main panel. Yeah, on the access and diversity. It would be really great if we can, in each panel of the main session, get at least one speaker who can take it on or look at it from the women's rights perspective. That would be a good achievement.
Yeah, Valentina from Bosnia. I would like to continue on the historical memory. When it was the main panel that was about access and diversity, the woman was chairing, but the original display was chairman, and we asked to change in chairperson. So I think that we need to be really aware of the space we inhabit. This space has still a lack certain element of understanding what is a woman or gender issue. If someone is insisting on chairman, and it's a panel on access and diversity, and there is a woman sitting. And so I'm just saying this because I think that it's a long-term fight and battle. This is my first IGF. And I'm used to see in any meeting where it's a multi-stakeholder meetings and there are a multi-theme meeting, I'm used to see that women comes to women issues. But this is not the problem of the women. It's the problem of the rest that still didn't understand that the women are the majority of their community. And they still consider this a soft or a less relevant issue. I think it's important that we continue to push, that we try to bridge a communication, but I also think that we need to be aware of the challenges that we have, and that we don't have to be too harsh on ourselves. For a space like this, it's a main panel. Maybe it's good to get structure and to contaminate all the sections, but I think it's a long-term process. And probably if each and every one of us, whenever think and talk, say at least one women's right issue sentence, I think that things can change. Because it's true that we are gentle according to power. So this is a space also of powers. If you are regarded as a powerless, people will consider you less relevant. But there are different ways of exercising power, and I think that the strength of solidarity can overcome this hierarchical power.
Thanks, Pele. Actually, yeah, it actually was a very hard fight to get even gender as one of the questions in the main theme. And in order to get like women mentioned as a specific issue in the main theme, we had to somehow soften it and put it under development. So this is kind of like the bartering that happens, like the political negotiation that somehow happens even within MAG, and it's difficult, but also significant, I think, because once you have it there, then you can talk about anything. It may be called empowerment, but you can talk about rights. And saying that, maybe Marianne, would you want to share something, because Marianne's also with the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition, and maybe there's something she can share. But before that, Parminder.
It was difficult in the MAG to get even gender inside development. Was there any such discussion done? And was there any demand made that we should have gender? I mean, two things. First, was a demand ever made that gender should be one of the main sessions? which I'm not sure a demand has been made by anyone, but if it has been made, it's good. And within the development was a discussion done that there's a problem about women or gender thing. I mean, if it is there, it's really a matter to be, looked into.
To be honest, no, because I'm not in the MAG, so I'm not privy to all of the, discussions and stuff that happen within the MAG. APC does have some members in the MAG, so this is why I somehow found out that maybe this is more easier to go in if it goes under development because it fits into the theme, and sometimes maybe that's just the way it is. I don't really know, is the short answer. But I guess the point that you raise is a very important point in that if we do want to raise gender as a main theme, then we have to do it and say, under paragraph 12 of the WSIS Declaration, this is the commitment. We really want to do this. We have to put it as one of the main themes. But if you see how we're trying to push for even human rights, which is affirmed, and we've been pushing so hard so far, it's 7th year. We're only hearing this year more visible articulation of human rights at the IGF, actually. So you are here, if you're a first timer, it's a very good time to come. You actually feel a little bit at home. But if you've been here before, it actually isn't always the case. So it does take time, but it also takes a lot of effort and consolidated effort by many people. And I think that's the thing that we miss a little bit in the Gender Dynamic Coalition, actually, that we only come together towards the IGF. And, we try to do things, but we miss the February deadline, for example. So we really need to kind of figure out how to sustain the work. So, Marian.
Yes, hi, can you all hear me? First of all, I just think it's fantastic that nearly 25 Azeri women are here. So thank you very much for coming. And I think we missed a very valuable chance to have a panel which was devoted to local IGF issues. So my first recommendation is that we think very, very hard now in Bali, for Bali, so that we engage. I think there was a lot of work to try this in Nairobi, and I unfortunately couldn't be there, so others may have to speak for that success. We missed a chance to get you women on a panel and give you your own space to speak to everyone. So that was our oversight, and so stay in touch, and next time we won't make that mistake. So I have a number of, a whole list of things. I'm thinking back to Hyderabad, which was my first IGF in 2008, and then Vilnius, and then last year. So things have definitely improved. I think it's becoming normal. Okay, it's quite normal. It's not odd to see a woman chairing. It's not unusual to see a couple of women on a panel, okay? And there's a lot more women, and generally, if you're going to think about women only at the conference, at least that's my feeling. I don't know if others here feel it. You feel that you see more women? Yeah? No, not particularly? Oh, okay, maybe not. All right. But my point is, my problem has always been that gender is, we all know intellectually, more than counting women. But we also know that in practice we end up simply counting women. Okay. And this is a UN problem. So you get a lot of people saying, well, to look gender friendly, I have to keep saying the word woman. And I think we can be a lot more creative and inventive at a really operational level. So could I just list some things at the IGF meeting, which is our big moment for coming together? It's not to say that it's the only thing we do, but this is where we all meet. I think we have to think about explicit organizational interventions along the lines that Parminder was saying, quite explicit intervention on the organization, for instance, like the gender card, take that further. Very important monitoring, okay? As Parminder again notes, it's up to us to make the connections. But before you make connections, you have to figure out what's there. So that's a good start. But also, that's explicit, but we also have to think in terms of how we organize panels and talk across coalitions. Implicit, the subtext of gender, the subtext of a conference. The subtext is very, very straightforward. The subtext is exactly as Anya is talking about. When you don't notice that every time a woman speaks, she's interrupted more quickly than when a man speaks. This isn't always the same across all women and all men. Some women are given the right to speak. Nellie Cruz is never interrupted. But then Nellie Cruz has developed a very important art, one-sentence statements, right? Perhaps we could take her model just to experiment. Okay, so that's the subtext. The other subtext is things, very subtle things like the connections we know between gender, ethnicity, sexuality, socioeconomic. So when you're thinking, you don't just think women on a panel, you think women on a panel with LGBT communities. You think technical women, more of them. You think, where are the coalitions where we know that women naturally, because of tradition, we don't find, for instance, the sort of big geopolitics stuff. so we can make implicit interventions. All right. So monitoring's good. Issues of voice and space. But I think what we tend to do is we tend to think that women and gender is the same for everyone everywhere. I'd like to see a little bit of attention to creating a forum, hopefully in Bali, where different women from different cultures and backgrounds come together and discuss different problems, which imply different ideas about what gender inclusion might be. You know, along the assumptions of cultural or religious difference or age group difference. What counts as safety? What counts as participation? Okay? I don't think we make enough work on that. So that's pretty much. Am I being, I think that's it really. Let me just, 2 points to finish. Sorry, I've been sitting here writing a whole list. Just a sec, give us a sec. Uneasy silence. Uneasy silence while I find my notes. Oh yes. We have to be clear whether we're talking about women and gender as a theme in itself, okay, that's one thing, and we talk a lot about that, gender, women as themes, or whether we're talking about gender as a space, which it doesn't always have to be said, it's just a space. So I'm back to my subtext. So not confuse the two, notice the difference. You want to have women or a gender theme, or you want to create a space in which you sit around in a circle for a start, okay, so more creative participatory formats without saying, this is how women do it. Not all women do it this way, right? You can, as women with experience with different participatory things. But again, my final point will always be, what does the coalition do between IGFs in light of the leadership from APC Gender IT, which does amazing work, okay? But that is distinct from the coalition. And none of these ideas will make sense unless we can spread and not just sort of wait. But also I'd like to hear from the APC Gender IT how you see the Gender Coalition.
Hi, can you hear me now? Okay. I'm Scott Seitz. I'm here with .gay LLC. As a member of the gay community, I was actually, my husband was very upset about me even coming here because it's difficult in this community here to be gay. And I had the fun of an American application called Grindr, which is a meetup application, but I use it as what we would call gaydar. And when I hit Grindr here, the first person is 385 miles away, just in case you want to know. So it's just an interesting culturally. We share a lot in the gay community with the gender community, and we intermix and intermingle and all these other good things. And there's some real big observations I have from my very first meeting and like 10 minutes in. So so they may sound foolish, or you may have heard them all before, and I apologize in advance, but I'd like to just, one observation I have is that the technical community is where the gay community often found itself hiding inside of my experience in Western culture, because we were the first people to, and I have a BA in chemistry and a BS in packaging engineering, but I have a marketing company, so it's all crazy. But the point was we could hide there and we would be judged based on our skill and our intelligence and not necessarily on whether we were golfing with the boss or any of the other traditional male models that went out there. And I think that's what we share very much with the women's community is we find our places where we can succeed and grow and be successful in who we are. I also think what we share with the community is, despite the fact that we've done a great job of building community centers in many, many cities in the United States that offer cyber cafes and other things, you know, culturally for the gay community, you still have to be brave enough to walk through the front door to be able to use that. So I think there's a lot of work an opportunity to develop strategies for getting people more accessible to the internet and to this kind of information and not holding back. I think the other strategy or the other thing, and I just found out I'm private sector. I forgot all about that. So I have green on. So I'm yay. So and I'm sort of like a double agent. So in that I'm My other business is a gay and lesbian marketing company that we started 16 years ago. So my last 16 years has been all about sitting inside of corporate America talking about the gay and lesbian and bi and transgendered and questioning and intersex and other portions of our community. And as a result of that, I have been named by Avri as a biz activist. So I'm a business activist. And I think that one of the things that I would share with you is that we can only succeed when we become visible. And if we are in cultures where it's dangerous to become visible, we have to have safety and we have to have visibility. And with those two things, we can get business interests and governments and local communities and other people to understand our needs so much better. We're part of the ICANN process for a new top-level domain, which will be an umbrella domain, .gay. We will be holding second-level domains for as many parts of the community as we can figure out, and then some. So we'll have lesbian.gay, bi.gay, trans.gay, intersex.gay, etc., to create those communities, but still all under one umbrella. So we're not all putting $185,000 in, and we can raise a single powerful voice inside of forums like this and ICANN and in our own governments and other communities. And because we can be there as a single voice inside of the .gay environment in this particular case, we get the volume and the interest of the we can speak with authority and as a group and gain the power that we really don't get without getting that coalition together that we're all talking about here. That's the biggest problem between having these ideas. What makes me totally insane is the great ideas that never get to happen, not even a little bit of them, and it's just so sad. And so I think the opportunity here is, how do you take this forward? How do you, businesses in general still ignore women. I can't tell you how many marketing companies I talk to that say, well, our target audience is male 25 to 35. I'm like, what about women? Well, they don't buy anything. It's like, huh? So anyway, there's a lot to share here. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. And I think the other observation is, because of what's happening at ICANN and because of the growth of the internet that we're going to be seeing, you all as a group, but the Internet Governance Forum as an organization, are going to be, for as much as you're having your successes with introducing women, the pressures that have happened at ICANN is that corporate America and corporate global corporates are moving in. They're moving in mostly with corporate mentalities, and some of that is, you're like the next layer down the stream. So I think you're going to have to continue to keep up your voice and your pressure and your visibility to make sure that as that happens, it doesn't force you to lose some ground or to use this time of change and of growing power to elevate yourself. Don't let it smash you. So anyway, that's it.
Insight and suggestions. We have half an hour to go, and I think this is a good place for us maybe to think about what we want to do between now and IGF that's happening in Bali. But I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about, is there anything that the people who are interested in gender and internet governance issues, is there anything that we can do in order to kind of continue the support for, say, women in Azerbaijan and some of the emerging interests or emerging concerns you might have that we can also help to take forward into next year's IGF, for example, because I know that it's actually very expensive to attend IGF. I'm from Malaysia. It'll be very cheap for me. So if there's anything I can help bring there for you on your behalf, then I will be more than happy to. And we need to think about how we can make this happen using the Gender Dynamic Coalition as one of the vehicles, maybe, to continue conversations so that we don't drop it. Every IGF we just drop. So we've had suggestions of having workshop guidelines to integrate gender into all topics. B, to think about interconnections between all of the different IGF thematic areas and what is the gender dimension to that. That is quite complicated. But I'm sure we are all kind of doing it a little bit in terms of what we are bringing to IGF anyway. Third is around visibility. How can we encourage visibility, not just in terms of the people who are present, but also in terms of how the space is organized and how we understand it as being gendered, from simple things like, chairperson, not chairman, but chairperson. And Marianne had a question of how APC sees the Gender Dynamic Coalition and how to move it forward. Well, we see this as a very important space, but we also understand that we have very limited capacity to be able to push this forward in a very sustained way without the collaboration and the input by everybody. So we did have several good suggestions before about building sites, about, wanting to do creative things and so on and so forth, and even just information sharing, which kind of fell and didn't quite happen. So I really, it's quite, I think it's quite important for us to take responsibility for what we want to do in order to push this forward. APC will always convene a Gender Dynamic Coalition meeting simply because this is kind of like a very important space for us. Even if it's just to have this, even if it's just to be able to convene all the women and IGF, who participate in the host country to come together and just be in this session, I think that in itself is very important. So we will commit to that. But in order to be able to do something strategic and to push this forward in a much more cohesive way, then we really need everybody's energy. We tried very hard to push something which came from last year's IGF, which is the gender report card. And it, and it's very, very good that this year MAG is saying that it's going to be part of its own mechanism, so everyone who organizes workshop will have to fill it up. But of course it's voluntary, but at least it's there. So that is, I think, quite a big achievement. But if, sorry? Yeah, it is. So it's good. It's good. Yay. So that's good. So, if there's something similar that we can do for the next IGF or other things that, it's very small but very practical and concrete, then it would be great to hear from you what you think, that you would like. And even if you cannot make it, there are many people in the Gender Dynamic Coalition who are not here, but who are, sort of like following remotely, who want to kind of like, see what happens here and so on. So it's okay even if you're not sure if you're going for the next IGF, but there's many things to do in between, I think. So, okay.
Great.
Yes, I think, perhaps someone could sit down with the transcript and work through what the main themes are and present a summary. That would be great. And secondly, could we have a clear deadline call on the list for the workshop submissions so we don't miss deadlines? I know I've written reports on the Gender Coalition in previous IGFs, and it's always a mad scramble. But it's very hard to keep that particular time schedule always in your head. So even if it's a very simple, on the list, a very simple, hey, workshop's coming up, that's all. Doesn't need to be more than that, but it'll come on your email and you can think. So perhaps APC, without overextending you already, seeing as you're taking the leadership with convening this important space, if you could do just that little bit to highlight the next IGF, and then we can then people can take ownership and submit workshops to a space, to a central spot, okay, and then some coordination. And I'd really like to see us look at working with the Bali, on the ground, grassroots issues, and really get, and I know nothing of that area personally, so I'm, like most of us, looking forward to being in Bali, but not for the right reasons, but so I'm sorry I'm throwing it back at you a little, but it's just to do with flagging, really.
Yeah, if I can, this is Avri again. If I can add something to that. Can you hear me? Okay. Maybe I just have to talk louder. Stupid thing out of my ear. One of the things about getting local involvement is starting earlier. In other words, in terms of some local involvement in Azerbaijan, it involved people starting work almost after last year, communicating with the various groups and such, APC sponsoring a trip of a couple people here to actually start talking to people that were here. So we can't get local groups involved remotely. We actually have to plan it, we have to travel to places, and then we can perhaps start to do it.
Hello, am I audible? Can you hear me? Okay. I'll put it. Yeah, so two things I think we should do, we can do is that one is that just go ahead and from the dynamic coalition make a demand that the gender should be main theme. And I think earlier you make the demand, earlier you would get it within the next 10 years. I mean, you start making it, then it becomes less, strange to people that you are asking for that kind of a thing. And it may come much earlier even. So I think we should just go and write that we want gender as one of the 4 main themes. And the second thing structurally we can do is that roundtables are a little more visible formats which have taken shape, and they also are cross-cutting subjects related. They are not, and gender is cross-cutting because it's not just about the workshop we are having on freedom of expression or on informational cultures. It is a cross-cutting thing. So a roundtable actually put people around talking that gender located almost everywhere and how does it connect, and people are doing a free flow discussion, and it raises the visibility in the IGF program of the theme, and that's something which you would get much easier and most likely even in the next IGF. So I think these 2 things come to my mind immediately.
Even as you're saying that, I'm wondering if we should have like a round table that sort of talks about gender and the 4 IGF thematic issues, like to have like very concrete sort of input around that. That would be quite good. Any suggestions from
Can you hear me? I and my colleagues wonder one thing: how, while you are visit to Azerbaijan, how you find out Azerbaijan woman? No idea.
Gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
What do you think about our woman? What do you think? Yes, rights or woman's life. Would like to hear your suggestion for us, for our woman.
The only thing I wanted to say is that I've met a lot of women who commented on the fact that they felt you couldn't see many women in the street in Azerbaijan. I met a lot of women from outside of Azerbaijan who told me they felt when you walk, say, at the seafront in the evening, there is many men outside, but in the street you don't see so many women. There's many people who said that. I'm just giving the feedback. Claim public space.
Okay, this is something that that you talked about earlier around you hope that there, because of tradition and because of culture, sometimes it restricts the ability to be for free expression. We did some research work around this actually. We looked at how different women in different places use the internet to exercise their ability to talk about things that are important to them. And one of the research that we did is in India, and we sort of talked to young women who are in college and asked them, how do you use the internet? How does this help you? And because a lot of young women in India also are very controlled in terms of, the family will say, okay, don't go out with this and that, the boyfriends will watch, and then what you wear, blah, 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 you have to take care and so on. So they found the internet to be a very interesting space where they can experiment and they can really express and be, represent themselves differently. They wear a t-shirt instead of the usual traditional costume and then test it out, and then if they don't like it, they can change it again. So it was a space where they were able to exercise more decision and more control about how they are seen and how they how they want to interact with other people, and even how they how they looked for boyfriends actually. And this is quite an important thing, you know, in our lives. We want to be able to make decisions about who we want to fall in love with and go out dating and stuff, right? So somehow the internet provided that interesting space to be able to make that happen a little bit more. And if you are interested to kind of like look at some of these types of issues to see how this might be able to, I don't know, maybe just for fun you want to read, you know. This research is in our website that you signed up for, so we are happy to share some of these things with you if you want.
Our women in Azerbaijan are more freedom in social networks, in internet. Like to know all the world, or in Azerbaijan, or only in Azerbaijan, or in Kafkas. I'd like to know it. May you give some information about how it in the world, in all the world?
So, well, if you're talking about access, I'm not really sure because it's we're over 80 million people in Egypt, 80, and only 28 million have access to internet. So, so I'm not sure how much of them are women because there's no gender-specific statistics from the Ministry of Communications in Egypt. But definitely, when women express themselves online, they are more specifically on issues regard to sexuality and to women's issues in regard to anything that is controversial for traditional societies such as Egypt. They are attacked, whether by sexual insults or trying to, if they are, for example, on Facebook and they're friends with the people who are actually opposing their opinion, they can try and use their personal pictures and personal information to have like an online campaign against them, to discredit their work and so on. So yeah, I think every and each country has its own specific violations, but I'm not very sure that there exists one country that is perfect in anything. So yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. I want to say that in our country, the rights of girls depends on family. No, and sometimes depends on country. For example, in Baku, most of girls active in social environment, and they are free to access internet. And obviously, you can see in this room, there are many Azerbaijani women. That's why if they can spend their time in there, it means we have and we want to give freedom for women. And if and I think and I hope the next 5 or 10 years, Azerbaijan will be women's rights, and next IGF, if you will come Azerbaijan, our many girls can access internet and they can search in there, and therefore for a hijab, our women have freedom. We are Muslim countries, that's why sometimes we have the hijab problems, but no, we haven't any hijab problems. They can go to school, university, or anywhere, and our women can say their things. And in there are many girls in Azerbaijan, and that's why we have little, not little, we have a great freedom for our girls.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we're about to close. Okay.
Hello. Hi, hear me? In these 3-4 days, we have so little time to introduce ourselves to you, and our women are very active in social works, and you may give us your contacts, and you will see how active in social networks, and you will get a lot of positive things about our women. May you give us your context? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we have like maybe 10 minutes left. And if there is any kind of like concrete suggestions on how to move forward, is there anything specifically that you would like to do personally, then please let me know.
It's not that something that I would like to. Yeah, we can see of how to do this, but if you would like to push for gender, then I think maybe if we can connect with other people, for example, working in the LGBT community or people working on disability rights, to see how their issues can also be reflected. Because I think it's maybe we're lucky to have each other here, but maybe other groups are not able to reach out enough with like their resources and their contacts inside we will say the IGF preparatory committee or whatever it is. So I think maybe this is something also we can also exchange techniques on how to do this as well. Maybe they have other ideas that we can use, and we can work together on this issue as well.
Maybe I can start with what I can do. I'm actually currently working with project. We are doing a project in Indonesia, and we already started engaging with a local LGBT group in Indonesia to start with the Indonesian IGF. So they just had the national IGF in Indonesia, and they already had like a speaker in the main session talking about gender and LGBT issues because of some of the connections. It's really like they're self-organizing, so definitely there is an awareness within the community and the movements about IGF, about the importance of internet rights, and there is definitely already mobilizing and organizing around it, and they're also working with the ministry, which is even better. So there is kind of like many different things which are already moving, and I can definitely try and connect the Gender Dynamic Coalition also with them to say, hey, we would really want to organize a workshop with you, for example. Can we do that? Can you come to the roundtable? So is the roundtable something we are committed to organizing? Yes. Yes. Okay. Cool. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer to write some kind of recommendation to the MAG to say that can you please integrate? Can you advise to other workshop organizers when you want to, how to organize a workshop, to also try and think about how you can integrate a gendered dimension into the work? Aubrey? Yay. And I think one of the good things, we wanted to do this list for a very long time, of potential resource persons from different stakeholder groups who's able to speak about particular issues. And I think maybe we can just start a wiki and just move with that, and then just try and get that, I don't know, or maybe even start in the email list and just move with that. That would be good. And what else? I think that was kind of some of the more concrete things that I heard. Is there anything else that was missed that you would like to raise, or any work that you are doing that you would like to also share with other people? No? So, like the chairman of the main session, I now call this session closed.